Hello, welcome to the Just Bloody Post-it podcast. It's for anyone seeking inspiration for how to share their stuff more boldly, more effectively online. It's stories of people who've learnt to promote themselves in their own way, and a gentle kick up the bum from a friend so that you can get better results from all the time you spend creating or worrying about content. I'm Helen Perry, and you can usually find me hanging about on Instagram, but I am loving this podcast thing. Huge thanks for listening. It's still very new. This is just episode 4. I need to earn my stripes. Our guest can truly call herself a podcaster. She's created 220 odd episodes of her show, The Baggage Reclaim Sessions. I hope you're ready for a juicy episode with the truth teller, writer, relationships guide, emotional baggage handler, and artist Natalie Lue.
It's that experimentation, giving yourself the freedom to experiment and not have to get an A+++ every single time you do something. Makes you shudder inside at the thought of it. But I tell you, if you're waiting for stuff to be perfect before it can happen, or if you're thinking you're going to know exactly what it's going to be like at the outset, you're never going to do anything, or you'll give up before things have really, taken root.
Nat's been creating, sharing, and running a digital business for more than 15 years. She has a thing or two to teach us. A self-confessed recovering perfectionist and overthinker, we chat about how much of yourself you have to offer up in order to have a successful online profile, about seeking permission from absolutely no one to do the things we want, and about who to listen to when it comes to social media strategy. Yikes. Natalie, welcome. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me, Helen.
I'm a little bit starstruck because you've been walking the walk on this stuff, Nat, the kind of thing that I do that so many people want to do now, running courses, having an online audience that you've maintained over many years, podcasting, writing books, all the things. So I'm really thrilled to have you. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure to be on.
How did you become the person who talks about these difficult kind of things on the internet, the kind of stuff that other people don't want to put out there, are ashamed of talking about? How did it start?
Well, I always say it started with a bad date. In a few weeks' time, I will have been blogging for 17 years. And I had read an article I think it was in The Observer, in April 2004, I think it was. And it was like about the emergence of blogging. And I remember clipping it, and I actually still have it somewhere. And then going on this dodgy date with a guy who was like, oh my God, like he's perfect. This is what my friend was saying. And I would marry him if I wasn't married already. And it was not a great date. And I remember coming home thinking to myself, why do I say that I want to be with a nice guy? And then when I go out with one, I'm bored, senseless. And I was lying awake with a dodgy stomach, thanks to the cheap date that he'd taken me on. And it suddenly popped into my head about blogging. And I dug out the article. And 10 minutes later, I had a blog on Blogspot, as you did tend to do back in the day. I think I started that in the early hours of a Sunday. And by Tuesday, I had readers. And it sort of grew from there. In order to be the person who does what I do today, a big chunk of that has clearly come from the experiences that I have been through, and growing up, I guess, in a culture of shame and secrecy and people pleasing and all of these things. Through having that personal blog a year into it when I was very ill. And I remember also going at the same time going through yet another breakup with a man who realized he wasn't ready for a relationship a few months into it. I remember talking out loud about this stuff because that's what I had done. From the outset, I just decided I didn't have a photo of myself because I obviously referenced my Irish upbringing. They assumed that I was very typically Irish looking. So white, pale, red hair. That's the vision that people had. They didn't realize I was black. But I just decided that I was just going to write with my authentic voice. There was a lot of Jesus and hilarious and all these things. And I digress is another one of my known phrases. And then I spoke out loud about it, and people were going, you're talking about me. And I was going, this is a bit weird, because I always thought that this is the stuff that makes me a weirdo and unlovable. But all of these people are saying that I'm talking about them. And that really sowed the seeds for then starting Baggage Reclaim a month later in September 2005, realizing I want to talk about this stuff, the stuff that makes you carry a lot of shame around. You think you're a weirdo and unlovable and that you got to settle for less. And there's a lot of people who feel exactly like I do. We have different experiences and often sometimes have a lot of the same experiences. But we think we're weird. We think we're unique in the sense of, oh my God, nobody else is going through this. And so I wanted to give a voice to all the stuff that we don't talk about. Also, we've lived in a time, we've gone through a decades here on Earth thinking that the world works in a particular way because we've been told you must do this and you have to be this. And I really just want to put a whole sledgehammer through that and challenge the status quo.
So it started off as a personal blog, and then it became the Reclaim Sessions, which is your podcast.
Yeah, so personal blog, and then I started Baggage Reclaim. We just called it a blog back then. I suppose now we just called it a website. But I started Baggage Reclaim in September 2005. The Baggage Reclaim Sessions podcast I started, I think, 2015. So
going back to finding out, discovering, oh my goodness, I'm not unique. There are, we all need to realize there are, if you're feeling something, someone else is feeling it too. And you set out with no plan to turn this into, you talking to a big audience of people. When did you start to think, wow, this is really something? How were the numbers looking on your website and your blog posts? And
what was interesting is actually, as I said, with the personal blog, within a few days, I had readers, because you could literally start a blog then and it would be that way. But by the time I was sort of outed as being, the blogger that I was, I think it was in the Daily Express. That was February 2006. I think I had 10,000 readers a month on my then personal blog. At the high point when I was blogging loads and, comments were a thing, it got up to 300,000 unique users, a month.
You got in at a great moment. When did you start to think that your mission to help people by sharing what you'd learned could be something more than a passion project, and that you could turn it into a business to support your work? And how did that start to manifest itself?
That's a great question, actually. That was, I'd say it was when I was on maternity leave with my eldest. So that was 2007. And what was interesting is about a month before I had my eldest, I started another blog called Bambino Goodies, which really became one of the biggest kids sort of lifestyle blogs in the country. And I started it because I was just sharing items that I had purchased, because, baby stuff used to be really bland, and I was looking for sort of the design-led stuff. I was looking for, color and pattern. And next thing you know, again, it's thousands of, unique users a month, because people were really dialed into what I was doing. And it was at that point, alongside people going, I would love it if you put this into a book. And so when I was on maternity leave and then I went back for 4 days and realized just how rubbish I was being treated, I was like, do you know what? I'll go back on maternity leave. I will start, playing around with, doing this full time. And a month later, I had published and sold my first ebook. But back then there was this, people would start blogs and 2 weeks later they would get, oh, hey, book deal. That never happened to me. I was approached by an agent, I think, at one point, but that didn't happen. But I thought to myself, well, do you know what? I'm not into the whole waiting around for somebody to tell you, oh, yes, permission. So I was hearing a lot about how you could self-publish. And I quite liked the idea of not just the control, but actually the money. So I thought, okay, I will write this ebook. It was part one of what became my first book, Mr. Unavailable and the Fallback Girl. It was going like gangbusters. I kept hearing, if you sell 5,000 or 8,000 then of your book, that's when you're really, really attractive to publishers. I've sold a hell of a lot more than that of my books. I mean, in total, just of the 4 main books, I think it's like 40,000 or something like that. Plus, I've got all the other sort of mini ebooks and stuff that I've had in, but the number just never kind of seemed to be enough here at publishers. But I was making more money than a lot of my friends who had gone and done deals and they were getting like 10p a book type of thing.
Oh man, if people take one thing away from listening to this, I would love it to be, don't wait for somebody to tell you that what you're doing is good enough. Like, do not sit around waiting for somebody else's approval, permission to do the thing that you want to do or put it out there. Nobody else needs to decide that what you create or do is the right thing at the right time. You can do it yourself.
Yeah, 100%. I do think as well, I think if you are of a particular age group, like I would say sort of late 30s and above, we are in the generations where it's like there is a path, there is a ladder, there is the way. And so it's all about gatekeepers, like somebody gives you a job and you fit into that box of that. Or, okay, so you can blog, but it's like, oh, it's a bit poo-poo. Like what you're wanting is somebody to come along and give you the deal and make you legitimate and credible. So there's a lot of all of this stuff, right? And it's like, it's like all about ladders and paths. And even when there isn't, like, how could there possibly be a path or a ladder, for instance, for blogging or for having an online business when these things didn't even exist? Like, but here we are, people love making like ladders and paths. And then we then start talking ourselves out of doing this stuff because then it becomes, well, I don't have enough numbers, or, I haven't been blogging for long enough, or I haven't done this, or I have to do this first before I can do that. Or it all becomes about like, okay, well, I'll do this, but I need to have a publisher come along and tell me that I'm credible or get some big deal at something. And that will get in the way of you actually doing what you set out to do, and also getting, creating joy from what you're doing as well.
Going back to what you talk about and write about in your books, on your podcasts, in your blogs, is there anything when it comes to relationships that's off limits for you in terms of what you'll share, or are you just comfortable with putting it all out there?
The funny thing is, whenever people meet me in person, or they'll send me like sort of like a detailed DM or something like that, I always hear, I feel like I know you like so well. They ask about my dog or my husband or the kids. The funny thing is I'm probably only sharing about 5 to 10% of my life. And I really want to stress this because I think that people often think that you have to lay yourself bare. And the thing is, I would be doing myself a disservice if I did that, because I wouldn't be being boundaried with myself about what I was doing. And there's ways to tell stories and to share information and to teach people without having to, have an open book of your life. What I'm always talking about really are the dynamics of relationships and what's behind a lot of what we do as humans, and using stories and, funny analogies and all sorts to kind of convey those messages, and obviously sharing practical tips and tools. I don't use my family, so like my husband, children, that type of thing, like I reference them in my work, but I'm never kind of like, sort of laying our private lives bare, because that's, they have their own lives. They haven't chosen to do what I'm doing. But there's a way to talk about your life in a boundaried way, using, those elements of story, sharing the learning from it, rather than that you don't have to go into all the ins and outs. I'm very down for like talking about emotional baggage, so that actually takes you into a lot of places with conversation.
What would you say to somebody who is like, this is a thing I want to talk about and people aren't talking about it, but can I? Like, dare I? Do I put it out there? How do you start? How do you take those first steps?
So often when we feel called to broach into an area like that, it's because we need to be seen. Like, that's how we are as humans. And what can happen is that, some people who are banging their drum the loudest, they get to be heard, and other topics that actually do need to be talked about get drowned out. And actually, I have a close friend who was in exactly the position that you were describing. And she has the Instagram account now, Menopause Whilst Black. And she started that like last year, it was probably around June time, and Black Lives Matter, and the protests were kicking off. And she was asking those same questions. And it's like, yeah, because obviously if you're thinking about these things and you're not seeing it anywhere, somebody needs to be saying more. Like, and even if there are a few people, there's always room for more. Like, what can you add into the mix? And the fact that it's not being talked about doesn't mean that it is irrelevant. Something I think that has been a huge boon to my work is that I talk about the things that aren't being talked about. So I give a word or a voice to something that we think is in our imagination, that we think is a problem that nobody else is going through. And so if you have something on your mind and you're thinking, oh, I don't know if I can talk about that because nobody's talking about that, mate, you have got an audience right there, because there are other people who want to hear about that.
There truly are. And there's so much space for so much space to be taken up by female voices, Black voices. Mm-hmm. I mean, there doesn't need to just be one person that speaks on any issue. Like, there is so much room. There's room for your take on it, whatever that might be.
Yeah, I think that there is this sort of sense. And I think, again, it goes back to our conditioning. We imagine that we have to be the biggest and the best, and that we have to have like all the audience. And I know Seth Godin talks a lot about, wasn't it, is the smallest viable audience or something like that? Like, you can do a lot with that. And again, when I think of my friend, like, she's only started that account last year. It's not a massive account, but the amount of press that she's got from it, because it's so specific and talking about specific issues, and she's not trying to cater to everybody. And I think sometimes when we're worried about, oh, can I talk about this? It's because we think we're supposed to appeal to everybody. We're not. There are some people who probably look at my stuff and they go, like, why is she talking? Good luck. Please roll on, find somebody else who's in your thing. I think, again, with online, there is this sort of sense of, there can only be the big people, talking about stuff. And then maybe if you get in there and you start talking about stuff and you see other people talking about that subject, you start to feel threatened. I've had my moments of that in the early years, because you go, like, when I started Bambino Goodies, there were hardly any kids blogs around. There was me and Baby Chino. Next thing you know, like, as they call it, mommy blogging took off. And you go, oh my gosh, like, this is the death of it. And it's like, no, actually, it really wasn't at all. So we have to keep that sense of perspective and think about, who do we want to talk to? What is the message that we want to convey? What are we trying to do? I think if we think about that more so than, will everybody like me? Is it okay for me to do it? We'll actually crack on, even though we also might feel scared at the same time.
Crack on. How's your relationship with social media now? I mean, Instagram was not a thing when you started out. You're saying it was all in the comments on your blog posts. How do you feel about Instagram specifically?
I had an up-down relationship with Instagram, which really pushed the buttons of my inner perfectionist and pleaser. And so I found that I was overthinking the whole thing I post on Instagram. There's a lot of people who have had, I guess, what you consider like a level of success on there. So they have a lot of followers or whichever. And then they go, oh, this is the capital W way to do things. So you got to take, this type of photos, photos of this, photos of that, or you got to say this, you got to say that. Mate, you're making it up. Like, you're literally, like, you're making it up. Sure, you can suggest some best practices, but a lot of this stuff is pure luck. More so than anything else. Let's just, let's be real here. And I wish people would stop packaging luck as, oh, this was a strategy. No, it wasn't. It was luck. You were in at the right time. Even I'm like, okay, like, I've done a lot of work with baggage reclaim, but I started my blog. I started baggage reclaim in 2005. I benefit from having started like way back then, right? But let's not peddle this whole thing of like, oh, like, I'm like massive on Instagram because I had a strategy. You didn't. Like, there's a lot of luck, in there. Especially if you're getting featured on, the Explorer page or whatever it is, like, a lot of that is luck, unless you're, in somebody's pocket. And then that's another thing altogether. And so I really struggled with it. Sort of a couple of years ago, I pushed myself into the zone of the perfectionism, the people pleasing. That's not me. And I wanted to give myself the freedom just to post what the hell I want to post on Instagram and see how I go then. And it wasn't about oh, does it have like a ton of likes? And what was interesting is once I gave myself the freedom to do that, and, I was posting, like, that's when I started posting some of my sort of artwork quotes. And
oh, I love them, Nat. If you're not following Nat, at Nat Lue, I hope you will be in the next 5 minutes. Nat, you post, like, I would call them like little love notes almost that you share on your Instagram. You can describe them better probably.
Yeah, and they're a mix of like watercolor and, watercolor or acrylics with, my thoughts and stuff, in my handwriting. And I've also done some embroidered pieces of it as well. I wanted just to have fun with it. I say what I want to say, I'll have a dance on there. This is before there was any TikTok or that sort of carry on. What was interesting is when I started just doing what I wanted to do and, was relatively consistent at it, my Instagram just like grew. It was like, it was really, really, not bizarre, but I was like, oh, okay. I remember talking about this, and I think you referenced this as well. I talked about this at Janet Murray's 2020 Sorted event, because it was this whole thing of I just really leaned into the things that make me me and doing things in that way, doing things that, like other people post quotes and all sorts of stuff. I was just doing it in my way because then I feel happy with what I've posted. And what's interesting is that sometimes I'll post stuff on Instagram, especially like I remember posting something that basically referenced an ebook that I have. Now that had a lower number of likes on it, because I'm sure you've noticed the same thing, that if you post, I don't know, something that's relatively promotional, you'll get like a lower number of likes. But
you might sell some stuff.
And that's exactly exactly what happened. And so now, like I don't put any pressure on myself to be on Instagram every day. I'll go through phases where I'll post a few times a week, and then sometimes I take a break from it. If I feel drained, like sometimes, like June, when there was a lot of the whole black squares and so many conversations about race, I felt very, very just a general feeling of drained. And I was not on Instagram much then. I've periodically taken breaks. I don't feel the need to make announcements about it. There's just no need for that. I feel like you need to find your sweet spot with your relationship with Instagram. It will require you to go out of your comfort zone sometimes, because otherwise you won't kind of stretch yourself into those places. You'll second guess what you can post on there. Like last week, I posted a video on there about, a course that I've got, coming up soon. That's quite out of my comfort zone, because I've noticed I'm very like, oh, I'll post like inspirational, educational, like funny stuff, but I won't necessarily be like, ooh, let me post something that is salesy. And I was like, no, like Natalie, like you need to talk about your course, like big woohoo, like get over yourself, like post the thing. It's fine. Like I'm still alive. This is the thing I remind myself, like, because it does sometimes feel the panic you feel about posting this stuff online, about Instagram. You're like, it gets, out of proportion. The boundaries thing is really important for me with social media, which is I will respond to DMs, but I respond when I feel like responding. I am now sort of as well really getting to that. I'm really would be doing myself and you a disservice if I even tried to suggest that I could solve your life in a one paragraph DM over Instagram, because like in the nature of what I do, there's all these people like ask me, oh, I just need your advice, mate. And I'm in no way comparing myself to Oprah, but you ain't getting in Oprah's DMs asking her she can give you some flipping personal advice. Why are you coming to me looking for like, how can I pick your brain? Like, oh, you flipping can't. So it's just that boundaries thing. And of course, there might be some people who might feel a way about it, but it's like, nah. But I don't put myself under pressure to be, everybody was doing lives. I'm like, oh my God. Do you remember when everybody was doing lives like every 2 flipping minutes at the start of the pandemic?
Do you know what? I still think it's there. My little live circles are on fire all the time. But it does. Why does it create this sense of panic? Like, oh, God, I'm missing the boat. I'm not live. I don't know, but why? What's happening there? I mean, you talk about people pleasing. You talk about a deep need to be liked and approved of. And, Instagram and all the social apps are kind of set up to, set those buttons off all over the place. So it's like, you have to take a step back and take a breath and go like, hang on a minute, do I need to do this? Or actually, does it not matter very much?
Well, and this is the whole thing. Like, there's one thing that I've learned over the last 4 years in particular, because my father passed away just over 4 years ago when I took it forced me to, well, you take time off in the immediacy of it. And then you go back, and I didn't fit back into my old life. And I ended up taking quite a bit of time off. I stopped the podcast really for the best part of a year. And do you know what? I never felt more joyful. Over these last 4 years, I feel like I've really connected with the joy of what I'm doing. Like, I've always enjoyed what I do, but I found that I was doing, a lot of us are performing at being a good worker or a good business owner or a really successful person rather than actually being ourselves. And so rather than asking ourselves, okay, I know I'm going to have to get a bit out of my comfort zone, but how do I want to interact with this thing? How visible do I want to be? What type of message do I want to convey? It's oh, well, successful people have morning routines. Successful people post on Instagram 3 times a day. I have to post these stories. I have to be in my DMs all the time. I have to do this live. But that's not an authentic, conscious, loving choice to go and do that, because you're going to burn out. There are times when, of course, we're going to have busy periods and, but if all the time we're always doing stuff because we're keeping up with the Joneses, right? We end up in this more hate, not love-hate relationship with Instagram.
I love it, Nat. People, because of what I do, I help people with their social media. I help people find their comfort with putting themselves out there, I suppose. But very, very often what they're looking for from me is a way of doing it. Can you please tell me the script? I will follow it. I will get success. Thank you very much. And the difficult answer always is that what you say about finding your way, that is actually going to be the best way, and that's going to bring you your best kind of success.
Listen to the podcasts and the blogs and take the course, but the thing is, and I see this across everything, when people come to me, same thing, what they'd love is for me to give them a relationship in a box, or for me to go, here's the blueprint, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, and you'll end up here. And believe me, I've definitely, particularly when it comes to work, I've definitely had that same thing of, oh my God, somebody just tell me what to do, right? The thing is, you have to, have a go at this stuff. And at the same time, you have to listen for what's authentic to you, in the sense of, there's a lot of the formula, the way. It's write this copy. There's, isn't it product launch formula that says fear, gain, logic? You have the sequence of emails. That's not me. Some people can do that stuff, but actually what you want to do is get the underlying principles of what it is that you are trying to do. And then it's you have to put your personal stamp on it. If you've got to send an email telling people, for instance, that your course is open, or you've got to post something on Instagram that's telling them about your new product or whatever, yes, do that, because that's an important part of growing your business. And if you don't talk about this stuff, next thing you know, you're crying into your pillow going, oh my God, nobody's buying my stuff. Why doesn't anybody like my stuff? I've had my moments. Well, of course, nobody flipping knows about it, because you don't bloody well post about it. He didn't tell anybody. If you think one mention, and I'm telling you the same things that I've said to myself, if you think that one cursory mention on Instagram stories, or posting one thing on Instagram, or tagging it in on the end of the email newsletter, that's going to have them going like gangbusters, it is not. You have to basically talk about your stuff and post about your stuff more than you are comfortable. That doesn't mean that you have to exhaust yourself. It doesn't mean you have to bust up your boundaries, but it does mean, hey, do you know what? Some of that resistance you feel around posting, that's your fear trying to protect you. It thinks that you're in this mortal danger. No, you just have to post something on Instagram. It really isn't that big. And the thing is that you don't get to reach at your goals and to connect with your audience if you don't post on there. If you don't send the email newsletter, if you don't post the blog or record the podcast or whatever it is, sometimes we want the results without
doing the work.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's a common condition.
Yeah.
It's can I just go round the side of the hard work
and
the awkward stuff and get to the and
I would for putting yourself out there with social media, and I say this as somebody, I've definitely had like visibility issues. It's so easy to compare yourself to others and be like, oh, well, I've got to post this. And what if I don't get likes on this? And, oh, they post it and all their grid is all aesthetic and organized, whatever. And it's like, that's just fear and a bit of shame, actually, in that. And I've had to really sort of dig into myself and say, actually, you know what? Take a step, any step, however imperfect it might be, and take it again and again. And do it for long enough that you have some data, please. Like, don't do that.
Yes.
Yeah, please don't do that thing. Like, and I say this, the same advice I give for social media is the same as what I give for boundaries. If you think that you can set a boundary once and then you're done for all time, or that everybody's going to be like, oh my God, like, thank you so much for setting this boundary. I just had no idea, right? And then like, you just never have to say anything again. Good flipping luck with that. And with social media, if you think that you're just going to post once and then it's like, oh, well, everything will just come together with this one post. And then like, you don't get the immediate results that you want from that. So it's like, oh, well, I won't bother again. Listen, post for a good stretch of time so that you have the data. Don't base it all off one or two or a few posts. Post for a while. Pay attention, see what's working, and then tweak and refine as you go. And that's how you find your way. Like, you're not going to find your way immediately. The best example I have of this is I've now done 224 it's either 224 or 225 podcast episodes. And when I first started the podcast, it had 5 segments, right? Because, my husband had suggested doing this podcast and I hadn't listened really to many, and I checked out a couple. It's like, okay, segments, right here, I've got 5. I've enjoyed making every single episode of the podcast, but guess what? It took making 80 episodes to discover that I wanted to talk about just one thing in the episode. And I did not get to the point of discovering that without making the previous 80 episodes. And granted, I stumbled into that because my father had passed away and I just did not have the energy to talk about 5 different things and produce 5 different segments. But I was like, oh, I'll just talk about one thing. And then I did it again. And so again, it's that experimentation, giving yourself the freedom to experiment and not have to get an A+++ every single time you do something. And like, put it out there when it's imperfect. Like, B- work can do a hell of a lot of stuff. Makes you shudder inside at the thought of it. But I tell you, if you're waiting for stuff to be perfect before it can happen, or if you're thinking you're going to know exactly what it's going to be like at the outset, you're never going to do anything, or you'll give up before things have really, taken root. And like this year, the next thing I experimented with is doing podcasts at trying to aim to be around 30 minutes. But it's taken making 200 or so podcasts to come around that. And it's been great doing that experimentation and collecting the data and listening to yourself.
Well, do you know what? Like, I'm booking onto your social media course. I'm buying your social media book. I mean, you just you've just totally put me out of a job. You're absolutely, I couldn't agree more with everything you say. Tell us a little bit before we go about something that sounds super interesting to me, your Reclaim Your Work Boundaries course. So we've reclaimed all our Instagram boundaries. How do we now start to reclaim our work boundaries? What's this about and who's it for?
Well, it's not just for employees, it's really for, freelancers and business owners as well. Really, if you are somebody who says yes when maybe you needed to or should have said no, if you say yes without considering the impact of doing so the consequences and the meaning, if you grapple with anxiety, overwhelm, frustration, resentment, exhaustion, feeling guilty, and sometimes maybe experiencing burnout or other stress-related illness, you may not have actually realized that the solution to all of these is boundaries. They're all symptoms of lost boundaries somewhere along the way. And so I've created Reclaim Your Work Boundaries because we've always needed work boundaries, but by gosh, after a year of the pandemic, we most definitely do. And it's really about, rather than waiting until you're in a crisis, exhaustion, having a meltdown, when you're steaming over with resentment or you're trapped in a bad situation, it's how to recognize stuff at a much earlier point so that you can take care of you. And also, how can you design your workday or how you're working in a way that actually supports your emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual well-being, rather than constantly sort of going against yourself through the way that you're working. So as much as it can be about like other people getting on your last nerve, it's also about like, what are you doing in your work life that is actually not in your best interest? Like me, as a recovering people pleaser, perfectionist, overthinker, I am speaking from that place of knowing what it's like to have to be like, oh my God, like I'm the worst boss I ever had. I've come out the other side of that because I figured out the work boundaries. And so I wanted to give people the tools and, you know, the practices that can dramatically shift your relationship with work, like very, very quickly.
Natalie, helping people since 2005. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you so much, Helen. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you today.
I spent a lot of that conversation wildly nodding my head in agreement with Nat. It's often not what we want to hear, but there is no one way. There is no right way of promoting or growing your business. People will try and tell you that there is, or sell you that one winning strategy, but I think it's bogus. You have to find your right way. And that happens when you try stuff and find out what sticks. You develop a thick skin and immunity to the mistakes, I think. Who cares? People have barely noticed. And when something doesn't work, you've learned a lesson. I'm off to consider my non-existent work boundaries now. A favour before we go. My absolute favourite number one people are the ones who leave ratings and reviews about this show. It really matters because it's how other folks can find it. Thank you for listening. Go and check out the other episodes too. They're awesome, if I do say so myself. And I'll see you next time.